Gonna put away my own plans now, 'cause I'm gonna follow you. I'm gonna follow you and follow you.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Sunday Night Scripture, where we're taking on the book of Revelation, and we're going to roll through chapter 9. And as a reminder, we are taking the historical point of view of the book of Revelation, because I do indeed believe that the book of Revelation times itself in the first century, but prior to 70 AD, in the times of Nero. And this book was written, I believe, to continue to forewarn the first century saints what was coming around the corner when it had to do with the Roman Empire and, of course, the judgment that was coming upon Israel. All right. So there's a lot of material here in Revelation 9 that I think is idiomatic and apocalyptic language that we can glean and understand from the Old Testament and carry it into the New Testament. And so I think what we're going to do right out the gate here is I'm going to kind of give you an overview of some of these words that are used and what they are actually describing. All right. So I just wrote some notes here, so I'm going to read this. All right. So this is kind of like a preview context based on the historical view. Primarily, Chapter 9 is depicting the further implosion and destruction of Israel and Jerusalem by the civil war that was started primarily by the three zealot factions led by three different guys. I believe their names were Simon, John, and Eleazar. And this started a civil war, as we've discussed in some of the other chapters. And I also think we're going to be introduced in the outer invasion of the Roman Empire coming in. And that had to do with Vespasian, who ended up coming down through the Euphrates River, which was a natural northern border to ancient Old Covenant Israel. And you're going to see about the four angels coming out of the river. So I think primarily that's what chapter 9 is about. And it's a continuing response from God when it came to the imprecatory prayers, which we reviewed, where the saints that were being abused, right? We know John the Baptist was killed unrighteously. Obviously, they condemned Christ, and they continued to persecute Christians even after the resurrection of Christ. And so this was a judgment upon Israel, as well as a fulfillment of the old covenant. All the law and all the prophets had to be fulfilled in order for the new covenant to be truly ushered in. And I don't mind saying out the gate, that's a bit of a problem for the futurist view, because they say it is finished, and yet there's things that still have to be completed. Well, if it's not finished, then we would be still under the old covenant law. However, I'm going to suggest to you, Jesus did return and complete in that generation, as he said in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, that generation would see all the fulfillment. And so we're reading an historical account of the destruction of Jerusalem and the Roman Empire crumbling shortly after that, where they eventually had to bow the knee and Christianity began to fill the earth. All right, so let me tell you some other things that in advance here. The star you will see falls from the heavens, right? You're going to realize that it's an angel, some kind of representative, if you will, or some kind of power, whether spiritual or ultimately physical. You can choose, but it's a power, and this power has command over that bottomless pit. So it's not a destruction of the earth. Locusts, I'm going to suggest these locusts are an analogy for the zealot armies of the three zealot factions that begin to devour Israel and Jerusalem from the inside. All right. And they have scorpion-like power. they don't look like scorpions. It says that they have power like scorpions. And so that makes a big difference. You start to grab the analogies here. He's trying to describe in apocalyptic language what's happening and how painful and harmful this is going to be to the area. Briefly, we'll mention the vegetation. You'll see the green grass and things of this nature and the green trees. Again, oftentimes, vegetation described, if it's green, it's more than likely God's people. Now, of course, you can take it literal, as we always say, or spiritual literal. So we'll try to go through and paint both pictures there so that you can kind of meditate on it and decide for yourself what you think it is. And of course, you're going to see the smoke of the pit. Well, I'm going to suggest that this is the hour of darkness. This is the wrath of God coming to judge. That's what that smoke of the pit, which is opposite in some senses, obviously, as when he says, okay, there's burning incense, it's a sweet smell. Well, this is a smoke from the abyss. So this is a different kind of smoke, and it represents the wrath of God. It represents dark spiritual forces and influence, I think. And horses, when you see the horses, battle, right? Strength, swift. Crowns of gold represents authority, power. But then you'll always see them talk about, and the faces of men. As soon as you see that, it's very, very easy to realize that he's talking about human agents, right? And so these are human agents. For example, if they got crowns, they got some kind of authority or power. Anytime you see something about faces like men and then something about women involved and describing the same thing, you're seeing confusion. You're seeing perversion. All right. And things that are chaotic, out of control. Teeth like lions, vicious, ferocious. Breastplates of iron, hardened hearts, puffed up chests, arrogance, difficult to stop, void of feeling. You throw a rock at that breastplate of iron and they don't feel a thing, right? That's the idiom there. Fire, smoke, brimstone. It represents judgment, but I think in Revelation 9, it's especially talking about the verbiage, the influence that the factions have into influencing people, the influence that even some of the Roman army leaders have, the false prophets that start to show up. And we are going to be looking at some accounts in the book of Josephus to further support that this all was very well documented by Josephus. I think there's another guy named Eusebius. And of course, there's Tacitus, and there's a few other great historical accounts, all documenting all these issues that happened in the first century. And the book of Revelation foretold all of it, right? And so did Jesus. And that's why we know he was and is and always will be the Son of God and the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. And our hope and our resurrection is in him because he reconciles us to the Father. And heads, you're going to see a lot of talk about they have heads and, they got their mouths and things like that. Oftentimes, even heads is talking about it's representing leadership and what they say and how they're influencing, and also a little bit how they think, right? Because in a head is the brain, right? And the mouth. And the tails we're going to see are false prophets, liars, deceivers. Think of a tail, right? Generally speaking, if it's a longer tail, it's very serpentine-like. That devil, that old serpent, he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning, right? So he's, when you see the word tails, it often represents lies and deception and serpent-like manipulation, all right? So I'm kind of giving you all that information right now in the front. So as we read it and I say it, you'll know why I'm saying it, okay? So without further ado, we're going to start getting into Revelation chapter 9 here, okay? All right, and now we're at the fifth angel, and he sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And I always like to do this, guys. The earth, as always, is Gi here. Why? Because it's a region. It's not the entire world. So I'm going to show it again like I always do. I just like to do it just so you understand that it's not a destruction of the entire world. It's often used for land, region, country, inhabitants of a region. So it's used as like the land of Judah, right? As you can see here, right? The land of Zebulun. It's a region. It's not the entire world, all right? So I wanted to show you that. I always like to reaffirm that. And so he's hitting a region. I'm also going to suggest this is a different region than chapter 8. As I mentioned earlier, Vespasian came down. He took out Galilee first, all right? So I'm going to explain how I think we see that. And we're going to see some Old Testament material where oftentimes this is how it works. It's not like judgment one region altogether at once. It's often hitting here, then here, then here, then here, okay? So, and this star, who we'll find out is an angel and is the king or the commander, if you will, of those locusts, right? That's what the star is. It's not a literal star. It's a representation of commander, lots of power, all right? And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. See, it was given to him. Why? Jesus popped the seals, remember? It's judgment time. The imprecatory prayers went up to God, and he's responding. So this is under God's sovereignty. This judgment has been pronounced. And you're going to see by the end of chapter 9, by the way, because I know sometimes this can get sensitive for people, the kind of things that they were doing. And once you see that, you're going to go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pits, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pits. Now, when you see that, I'll use this as an analogy. Remember in 2021, right? And there's a lot of controversy, at least in my country and country of Canada. It could have been July. It could have been a sunny, it was a beautiful day, light breeze, 74 degrees. And yet it was dark, wasn't it? There was a lot of darkness. So what this is a representation of darkness is darkening the sun. Notice, by the way, there's no moon in this particular case. He's saying that all the beauty is starting to be darkened. The air now, which should be fresh and clean, is now you're starting to cough. You can't even breathe, right? Which, by the way, when you have 3 masks on your face, it's kind of hard to breathe, isn't it? Well, when you have a lot of civil war going on, it gets very, very intense, and it's much, right? Panic attacks. That type. Just think of the area is darkening. It's not that the sun is falling out of the sky or somehow there's no air anymore. No, the idiom is things are getting very intense and dark, and you're feeling the spiritual darkness is starting to come out because the wrath of God is coming out. And there came out of the smoke locusts, all right? So right here, now notice the locusts don't come out of the pit. They come out of the smoke. All right, so the smoke comes out. So I'm going to suggest to you that the smoke is that dark spiritual force, the wrath of God, and who's the commander there. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that this is leadership influencing and moving those zealots, which are described as locusts because they start devouring the land. They start stripping it bare. They start taking all the good of that area and they start imploding on it and plundering it, okay? That's what the idiom here is, and I think we can use the book of Josephus to also support that that's exactly what happened. And we're going to use the Old Testament to show you that that's exactly what God would call other nations coming in and invading Israel. So out of the smoke, these locusts come upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. So this isn't an analogy, it's an idiom. They have scorpion-like power. They sting, they hurt. All right, and really quick, I'm not going to spend too much time. I didn't do a huge study on this, but I just want to show you here. Think of it as an analogy. It says right here, okay, it says, don't be misled by the title of the story. Scorpions are amazing animals, but they can pack a painful sting. So even though they are rarely deadly, you wouldn't want to think they are harmless. So the idiom is they're super, super painful to get the stings, right? But you don't necessarily die from it. And that's exactly what you're going to see as the idiom as we continue that's happening in Revelation 9. All right. It says, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree. Now, I'm going to go real quick here to chapter 8. He talks about all the grass being burnt up, right? I'm not sure where that was exactly. I know that it was in, here, right there in verse 7. All green grass was burnt up. Well, when you go to this chapter, he says, don't hurt the grass. Well, wait a minute. If it was all burnt up, well, it's not all burnt up. It's maybe all burnt up in one area, but not all burnt up here. And so again, much like Jesus said, woe to you, Bethsaida, that's an area, right? Woe to you, Chorazin, that's a different area, right? Galilee got hit, right? So different areas get hit in different ways. And in this area particularly, he's saying, don't hurt the grass. So that would be the literal interpretation. Now, the spiritual interpretation, what did Jesus say? I think we reviewed this already. Oh, you daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves, right? And then he says, by the end of that, he says, because if they do this is as he's being crucified, if they do this in a green tree, what will they do in a dry? So I'm going to say that there's also a spiritual representation here, that the green grass is the representation of God's people. Because right after that, he says, but only those men. So they're commanded to hurt only those men which don't have the seal of God in their foreheads. So do you notice that it goes from talking about vegetation, if you will, to all of a sudden, don't hurt the grass, don't hurt the green things, just those guys that don't have the, just the people that don't have the seal. See, I think this is, in this particular case, a protection on God's people. Now, I know that some people sometimes, well, wait a minute, how come they're being protected if that's true and then they're not? I'm going to be as direct as I can. Not every Christian lives to be 99 years old and dies in their sleep, right? Peter, at the end of the book of John, is told that he's going to be crucified. And at some point he says, okay, I'm going to be crucified. Well, what's going to happen to John, Jesus? And then the Lord says, if I will that he tarries until I return, then that's my call, essentially. A little paraphrasing here. That's my call. You just follow me. Peter died before 70 AD. According to the records, John did not. He lived to be 93 years old. And I think he died either 99 or 100 AD. All right. So a different call on Peter, right? And different results. Go to the 7 churches. If you look at the church of Smyrna, Jesus loves this church, yet he says to them, be faithful unto the death. That church undergoes martyrdom. This is the sovereignty of God, because that glorified God, that they were willing to suffer death for God. Then yet when you go to the Church of Philadelphia, he says, I will keep you from the hour of temptation. Maybe he's holding them to continue preaching the gospel after 70 AD. So this is where we have to trust God, that he knows exactly what he's supposed to do. So seeing more persecution in one area on Christians and less of it in another, that's the way it is. So I don't see any problem with the spiritual or spiritual literal, or just literal interpretation. It all works because it's all very steady. This is how it is. Not everyone is blessed to the same degree. It's not a communist heaven. That's just the way it is. All right. So whatever cards he gives us, we move forward with those. Even the talent parable, by the way, right? Some get 10, some get 5, and some get 1, right? Not everybody gets the same. All right, we'll continue here. And it says, and to them it was given that they should not kill them. So you were talking about the stings. Don't kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. It stings, it hurts, repeated stinging. It's painful. It's just, unbearable. And yet, as it continues, as in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. So we're going to go take a look here at first of all, some information about locusts. All right. I'm going to show you that I'm using the King James Version here. But the problem is I'm going to switch over to ESV, and I'm going to tell you why, because I'm always upfront as to why I'm switching. When you look here in the Old King James, he uses the word palmer worm right here. That's locust, okay? And so due to the fact that it's locust, here it's palmer worm, so it's harder for you to make the connection in the book of Revelation when he says locust to the Old Testament, because when you read Old King James, he's using a lot of times palmer worm, cankerworm, caterpillar, and sometimes they use locust. Whereas we know that there's variety of locusts, but I think the better way to handle that would just be to say locust, so you can make the connections. All right. And I apologize, guys. My roller here is a little bit slow, and so sometimes I'm not able to roll quite as fast. But we'll stay on it. We got it. We got it. All right. So I just wanted to show you though that I'm going to do ESV and several of the other translations. It's just this is a decent translation, so I'm just going to go with this one. And as you can see, right, Israel has not returned to the Lord. You're going to see that part of judgment is on God's part is hoping that people will repent and change their mind. Of course, I believe he has foreknowledge, so he knows whether they will or won't. That being said, the offer is still there. So as you can see, he says here through the prophet Amos, I gave you cleanness of teeth in all your cities and lack of bread in all your places, yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. See, he said, I held back the bread and you still didn't return to me. It's like you didn't notice. I also withheld the rain from you when there were yet 3 months to the harvest. Now look at here. He says, I would send rain on one city and send no rain on another. Just like, hey, burn up all the grass here. No, don't touch the grass over here. See? It's the same kind of pattern. Here, we're going to do more damage. Here, we're going to do less, right? In the hopes, I think, to get them to change their minds. And as he continues, he says, I would send rain on one city and send no rain on another city. And one field would have rain, and the field on which it did not rain would wither. So 2 or 3 cities would wander to another city to drink water and would not be satisfied. Yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. So I picture it like this. You got some water problems over here. So these guys don't. So these guys go over there and say, hey man, we got some water problems where we're at. They're like, oh really? That should kind of wake both parties up. Right? And it's inconveniencing the one party that has the water, and it's inconveniencing the ones that don't have the water, right? So, but in that process, there should be a discussion as to, well, why do you think this might be going on? And I think a lot of countries should be asking themselves the same question. And it says in verse 9, I struck you with blight and mildew, and your many gardens and your vineyards, your fig trees and your olive trees, the locust devoured. All right. So I wanted to show you that, see how it uses the terminology there, that the locust devours. All right. Shortly after, by the way, he says, I killed your young men with the sword. All right. So you're seeing right after those analogies that the sword comes in. That's an invasion, right? A human invasion. But that's not quite as spelled out there, but I really wanted to focus on how some areas and other areas are being judged at different times, right? To kind of wake them up. And he's saying, come on, repent, wake up, right? That's the vibe of it. You see the same thing in chapter 9 of the book of Revelation. And of course, the theme of a locust is that it devours and strips bare the land. And Jesus said, behold, your land, right? Jerusalem, Jerusalem will be desolate. That's what he said, and that's what happened. All right, so Nahum. By the way, I believe that this is actually a prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD. So let's read this. Draw water for the siege. Okay, there was 2 sieges in the first century, one in between 64 and 66 AD, and I think towards the 70 AD. And by the way, both of them lasted 5 months. So those locusts and those things and all that, and it lasted 5 months. You can kind of take your pick from that. I lean towards the 70 AD one, but you have a couple choices there. but it was well documented that it was 5 months. Draw water for the siege, strengthen your forts, go into the clay, tread the mortar, take hold of the brick mold. There will the fire devour you. The sword will cut you off. It will devour you like the locust. Multiply yourselves like the locust. Multiply like the grasshopper. You increased your merchants more than the stars of the heavens. The locust spread its wings and flies away, or spreads its wings, and flies away. Now look at this. Your princes are like grasshoppers. Your scribes are like clouds of locusts. Scribes are lawyers, and they're like locusts. Your princes, I would suggest, is the leadership. They're like grasshoppers. That's just another form of a locust, right? They're devourers. That's what they do. They're devouring the people. They're devouring the land. Okay? So you're seeing that idiom really speak there. Now, I think Joel, which again, I think is prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, he really takes it home here as far as I'm concerned. It's even titled in the ESV, An Invasion of Locusts. But the thing is it's very made, in my opinion anyways, made very clear that this is a nation, an army, and he's using the idiom of a locust because it's coming to destroy the land. And he says, hear this, you elders, give ear, all inhabitants of the land. Another way you would see in, I think it's Isaiah 1 or 2, he says, hear you, O heavens, hear, O earth. He's talking to heaven's elders, leadership of the people. O earth, inhabitants of the land. It's the same thing. Hey, listen up, you leaders, and listen up, you civilians that are listening to these leaders. And I think that's another thing that people are missing in Scripture. The leaders, yes, to much is given, much is required, but that doesn't take all responsibility away from the civilians. So I'll use my nation as an example, right? When the leadership of my country, and I don't mind telling you, it's Trudeau and some of those premiers, they started spitting out fire out of their mouth, right? The civilians, many of the civilian servants, were complying with what he was saying to do. See, that's the issue. So it's not just on the leadership. It's primarily going to be, but the civilians still have a responsibility to recognize when the leadership has turned into locusts or grasshoppers. We have to spot that. And I'm going to suggest to you, especially the church. I'll continue. Has such a thing happened in your days or in the days of your fathers? Tell your children of it. Let your children tell their children and their children to another generation. Notice that another set of children, right, is another generation. How long is that typically? 2,000 years? I don't think so. 100 years? I don't think so. Is that when you typically have your children? When you're 110 years old? I don't think so. I don't think so. I'm going to suggest to you that 40 years is the reasonable time for a generation. If you want to stretch it to 70, that's fine. But we're way out of bounds if you're using 1948 Israel. Modern day Israel is your timeline because they're going to be 75 this May. But as we continue, of course, what the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. And look what he says next here. Awake, you drunkards, and weep and wail, all you drinkers of wine, because of the sweet wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has come up against my land. See what he's saying there? A nation has come up against my land. The description here is the locusts. A variety of locusts are coming to devour your land. And look at this. They're powerful and beyond number, right? Its teeth are lion's teeth. Revelation 9, you're going to see that if we haven't already read it. And it has the fangs of a lioness, ferocious. It has laid waste my vine. See, this is an attack, a judgment upon Israel. Because God is saying, that's my vine. They've come upon my land. Well, the Roman army came upon Israel, didn't they? Yes, they did. And that's what this is about. It has laid waste my vine and splintered my fig tree. Even the futurists say, oh, the fig trees, that's Israel. Right, exactly. And it got destroyed in 70 AD. And this is the book of Joel. And this is being prophesied in advance that this is what's going to happen to Israel and to the temple and to Jerusalem. And as you can see, it has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches are made white. So these locusts are being represented, if you will. Essentially, these devouring armies are going to devour the land of Israel. That's what's happening here. And again, he says, my land. And at that time, in Old Covenant Israel time, God's land was indeed the land of Israel. Back then, that was his people, his land, right? It was his covenant with Old Covenant Israel, which ended in 70 AD, ushering in the new covenant. All right, so let's go back to Revelation. All right, and as you can see, oh, by the way, guys, I didn't grab too much, but just so you know, like it talks about here about 5 months, right? I think it mentions it again. I just did a quick Google thing here. And all I put in there says, how long was Jerusalem under siege in the first century war? 4 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. So if you add 3 days to that, that's 5 months, bang on. And that was just like a quick Google search. So that wasn't a heavy study, but in some of the content that I was studying from other people, 2 sieges, one under Gessius Florence, or Florus was his name. I think I'll be reading some stuff from him. And under Vespasian, there was a siege for about 5 months. All right. So I just wanted to further indulge you in that information. And we'll read a little bit more here because there's a description of the locusts. And then I'm going to take you to the book of Josephus, okay? And it says here, and the shapes of the locusts, and the shapes of the locusts. Now, that's not the best translation. Shapes isn't the greatest. I'm going to show you in Bible Hub here. It's representations is a better translation, I think. Sorry, guys. It's just rolling a little slow for me here. There we go. Oh, there it is. Okay. And the representations of the locusts. Okay. So he's giving you a description. So shapes is not as good in my opinion. It's not horrible, but it's not quite as good. So I just wanted to show you that in the Greek that's what it's saying. All right. And I could actually continue in the Greek here, where it says we're likened to horses being prepared for war. All right. That's what it says there. So I'm going to go back here to the Old King James though. So it's a description of, in my opinion, the zealots. All right. It could be a description of the Roman army soldiers, but I'm leaning towards the zealots. All right. So either way, I'm going to tell you why I think it's the zealots when we go to Josephus. They were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns of gold, authority and power, and their faces were as the faces of men. There's your human agent. And they had hair as the hair of women. There's a little confusion and chaos there. What do you mean faces like men? And I know I got long hair, right? But scripturally, I'm going to suggest to you when you see like a description towards men, and then on the same thing, same description, you're getting female qualities as well as crowns of gold, and you're getting teeth, as it says here, whereas teeth of lions, just like we read in the book of Joel, right? And they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, right? Puffy, arrogant. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions. And they were, and there were stings in their tails. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. All right, we're going to pause there. And I'm going to go to the book of Josephus. And I'm going to try to line us up into book number 4. Okay, great. Excellent. And we're going to just roll away, guys, to chapter 5, and I'm going to show you section 3 of chapter 5. There we go. There's chapter 5. And we're going to go to verse 3 here. All right. And I think I'm going to be reading pretty much this entire section 3. And remember, this is the book of Josephus, so this is just an historical account. But let's see if it lines up with some of the things that I've been saying and that is said in the book of Revelation. All right. Now, after these were slain the zealots, and the multitude of the Idumeans fell upon the people as upon a flock of profane animals, and cut their throats. And for the ordinary sort, they were destroyed in what place soever they caught them. But for the noblemen and the youth, they first caught them, pay attention to this part, and bound them, and then shut them up in prison, and put off their slaughter, which means they didn't kill them, in hopes that some of them would turn over to their party. In other words, join their crew. But not one of them would comply with their desires, but all of them preferred death before being enrolled among such wicked wretches as acted against their own country. By the way, that's sedition, folks. When anyone, I don't care who it is, acts against their own country, that's sedition. That's what that is. And that's what these zealots were doing. But this refusal of theirs brought upon them terrible what? Torments. Isn't that what we read in Revelation 9? For they were so scourged and tortured. See? They'll seek death, but they will not find it. That's a suggestion of being bound, imprisoned, tortured, always in torment, constantly being hurt, beat up, frightened, robbed, plundered, imprisoned, right? That's what's going on here. That their bodies were not able to sustain their torments, till at length and with difficulty they had the favor to be slain. So I was actually, okay, we'll be nice to you now and we'll kill you. See? That's what was going on in the first century, in the Roman-Jewish war. But this is the civil war. These are Jews killing Jews in the first century. Those whom they caught in the daytime were slain in the night, and then their bodies were carried out and thrown away, that there might be room for other prisoners. Other prisoners. So in other words, you know what? We got to make room for more so we can abuse and torture more people. And the terror that was upon the people was so great that no one had courage enough either openly to weep for the dead man that was related to him or to bury him. Is that tormenting? I'm thinking it is. But those that were shut up in their own houses could only shed tears in secret, and durst not give even a groan without great caution, lest any of their enemies should hear them. For if they did, so if they heard you mourning for one of your loved ones, this is what they would do. Pay attention to this. For if they did, those that mourned for others soon underwent the same death with those whom they mourned for. So if something horrible happened to your mother or your father, and you started crying, they went, oh, you're crying for them, are you? Oh, well then I guess we'll have to do the same thing to you. Sound like locusts? Sound like zealot armies? Sound painful? And as it continues, it says, only in the nighttime they would take up a little dust and throw it upon their bodies. And even some that were the most ready to expose themselves to danger would do it in the daytime. And there were 12,000 of the better sort who perished in this manner. All right, so that's a lot of people. Now, I know that's hard to read, guys, but again, the book of Revelation is historical, so we can take some peace in that. And we're supposed to glean from this to make sure that, and that's what we Christians are for. We're supposed to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't have to happen again. And it won't, because we're here. I'm just telling you, we need to call out the oppressors, the extortioners. We have to call them out, and we have to work peacefully, of course, right? But we got to tell them the truth about the laws of God, which comply, of course, as long as they comply with the laws of God, the laws of man. And we do. We have at least in Canada, I think America has a lot of good laws, a lot of good precedents. So lean on them. All right. So we're going to go to Nay the Terror. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to take this from somewhere in the, there it is. Okay. So it's Nay the Terror right here. Sorry, it's a little slow on the roll for me. Oh man. It jumped on me. Sorry, guys. Oh, yeah, it jumped really. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's not too bad. Oh, perfect. I think. Yeah. Good, good, good. All right. So where's that Nay the Terror spot again? There it is. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Here we go. Nay, the terror was so great that he who survived called them that were first dead happy. So basically, anyone who was surviving were like, I wish I was dead. That's what that says. As did those that were under torture, by the way, in the prisons, declare that upon this comparison, those that lay unburied were the happiest. I'd rather, instead of being tortured, I'd rather be dead. That's what that says. They will seek death, but they will not find it. See, that's the theme there. These men, therefore, trampled upon all the laws of men and laughed at the laws of God. And this is what we're supposed to glean from the book of Revelation. When you see a leader that starts, for example, I don't know, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Guys like Trudeau who turn around, watch my video, not, if you guys want, if you got some time, Anchor. At the beginning of that, I have a recording of him basically saying, we're going to override people's rights. We don't care. That's the laws of man, right? Informed consent, I would suggest to you, is the laws of God indeed, and the laws of men. And what did they do? And what did the civilians do? They participated in that fire, didn't they? All right. So this is what happens when people start thinking that they're God. See, they're God. And that's what happens when you're faithless. All right. And you have faithless leaders, right? Faithless leaders. And then you have faithless civilian servants that turn around and listen to this faithless leader and don't care about the laws of men or certainly the laws of God. And that's what happened with these guys. So that's why we call that nonsense out. And for the oracles of the prophets, this is amazing, by the way. This part is amazing. I'm just sharing this with you because it's amazing. For the oracles of the prophets, they ridiculed them. So he's talking about the Old Testament prophets here. They ridiculed them as tricks of jugglers. Yet did these prophets foretell many things concerning the rewards of virtue? Read Deuteronomy. I'll bless you if you listen to me, and I will curse you if you don't. And punishment of vice, which when these zealots violated, they occasioned the fulfilling of those very prophecies belonging to their own country. So basically, these guys were so blind, they were laughing at these prophecies. Meanwhile, they were actually fulfilling the prophecies. That's how blind they were to what was going on in their own behavior. For there was a certain ancient oracle of those men that the city should then be taken and the sanctuary burnt by right of war when a sedition should invade the Jews and their own hands should pollute the temple of God. So they had scriptures that told them that this was going to happen to the temple of God. Now, while these zealots did not quite disbelieve these predictions, they made themselves the instruments of their accomplishment. So they didn't know, oh, can you believe that stuff? And then they were actually doing it. That's incredible, really. But of course, right, they will, if you go to 2 Thessalonians, right, they will believe the lie. God will send them a strong delusion. All right. And since we're here in book number 4, I'm going to take you down to chapter 9. And you're going to see a very, very interesting section here. Okay, chapter 9, and we're going to go to verse 10. So it kind of closed up on me here. Hold on a second, guys. All right, hopefully I'm still in the same section. Oh, and by the way, just in case you need a little date, see, we're around 69 AD, according to the book of Josephus, all right? And I'm going to take you where it says, now this man. It's talking about, there he goes. Yes, now this Simon. There we go. All right, I'm going to get this to go down a little bit for me, guys. A little stalling out here, that's all. Hold on a second. Okay. Now this Simon, who was without the wall, this is one of the zealot leaders, was a greater terror to the people than the Romans themselves, as were the zealots who were within it, more heavy upon them than both of the other. And during this time did the mischievous contrivances and courage of John corrupt the body of Galileans. I'm going to suggest in advance, this is that power that comes out of their mouths. This is the smoke that has the locusts go and move. All right. For these Galileans had advanced this John and made him very potent, who made them suitable a requital from the authority he had obtained by their means, crown of gold. They gave him power. And why did they give him this power? Well, you're going to see why. For he permitted them to do all things that any of them desired to do. Take a look at the leadership of your own country, folks. If you got a leader that says, oh yeah, we'll legalize that. Oh yeah, we'll legalize that too. You guys can do whatever you want. Right? So, think about it. Measure it out in your own country. Is that what's going on? I can tell you right now, Trudeau for sure. I'll tell you right now, Trudeau for sure. Legalizing things that can only harm you. That's a bad representative. Why? Because what he's doing is because whatever, let's say, you want to get, stoned all the time and he legalizes it. That's like you giving access, to your children and say, yeah, you can eat 10 bags of Doritos every single day and as many chocolate bars as you want. And don't worry, don't ever brush your teeth, by the way. And that's fine. Who cares? That, permitting them to do whatever they wanted. Sure. Of course they like that. Of course they did. But that's not good for you though. A good parent, right? Just like a good God doesn't say, yeah, you can do whatever you want. Put some boundaries on that. Why? For your good though, not for your harm. All right. But this leader, of course, he lets us do whatever we want. So we'll continue here. And he says, while their inclination to plunder was insatiable, as was their zeal in searching the houses of the rich, and for the murdering of the men and abusing of the women, it was sport to them. They also devoured, see that word there? Devoured? They also devoured what spoils they had taken together with their blood, and indulged themselves in feminine wantonness. What? These aggressive, murdering men started indulging themselves in feminine wantonness? That's a little weird. Without any disturbance till they were satiated therewith, while they decked their hair like women, and put on women's garments. What? These aggressive, angry, zealot men would start putting on women's clothes? Really? And were besmeared over with ointments, and that they might appear very comely. They had paints under their eyes and imitated not only the ornaments, but also the lusts of women. See these feminine notes that Josephus is writing here, that these guys are vicious men, yet they're bringing in these feminine qualities, and were guilty of such intolerable uncleanness that they invented unlawful pleasures of that sort. Inventors of evil things, Romans 1 verses 28 to 31. And thus did they roll themselves up and down the city as in a brothel house, and defiled it entirely with their impure actions. Nay, while their faces looked like the faces of women, they killed with their right hands. See the idiom there with the right hand from Josephus? He's a Jewish man. He knows what the right hand idiom means. It means, what do you do? Who do you follow? Who's holding your hand? Whose hands are you holding? And when their gait was effeminate, they presently attacked men and became warriors, and drew their swords from under their finely dyed cloaks, and ran everybody through whom they light upon. Essentially, best as I can understand it here, they would basically dress like women, make themselves look kind of like they're pretty women, and all of a sudden they'd pull out their swords from underneath their skirts or whatever it is that we're wearing, and they'd murder someone. So look at the description in Revelation chapter 9. Right? That they had hair like women, if I recall correctly, right? Hair of women, right? But faces of men, and their teeth like lions, right? Breastplates of iron. They didn't care. Callous, murderous, right? All right. So I think I've made a pretty good point there that that's pretty good information. Now you could, of course, think that it's the Roman armies as that's up to you. I'll let you take a look at that. And of course, they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. Now, some people believe this is Satan. Some people believe Satan is wormwood. I don't go into those territories because I think that basically any kind of spiritual being that's given a certain power by God to do something, if it doesn't say what their name is, I don't have to dig into that. I just know that whatever spiritual force this is, whether it results in the physical human being or a spiritual being, if he doesn't have, I don't have to specify who it is, but clearly it's someone under God's sovereignty to have this happen. One woe is past, and behold, there come two more woes hereafter. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. And I would suggest this is a reminder that this is a response to the imprecatory prayers of these saints who asked for vengeance because they were persecuted, harmed, tortured, abused for God and the name of Christ. Saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now we have to pause right there. Euphrates, folks, is, as I mentioned, ancient Israel's natural border. Okay, that's what it is. So that's further evidence that this has nothing to do with North America or the entire world and a new world order, because it doesn't say the four angels are loosed from the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean or anything like that. It's a river that's bordered to Israel. This totally places it right there in Israel. That's how you know it's a judgment specifically upon Israel. And again, Vespasian came through the Euphrates rivers to destroy Galilee first, and then he worked his way down, all the way down to where? Jerusalem, where the destruction of Jerusalem happened. All right? So when we get to that spot, by the way, where it talks about horsemen 200,000, we'll review that briefly, but I'm just going to tell you, you can't all of a sudden bring this to China. But futurism does that. When you think future, you go, well, 200 million, well, that's got to be a country that's got a lot of people, see? Now you totally missed that it just said Great River Euphrates, right? So I'm going to explain that a little further, but I just want you to understand that, when you have this futurist view, you're guessing all over the place. That's what happens. You're just going to keep guessing, keep guessing, keep guessing. Whereas if you were reading this in 55 to 60 AD, you wouldn't have been guessing. You would have known the Great River Euphrates. You would have known where that was. And you wouldn't have assumed, oh, could this be China? You wouldn't have assumed that back then, would you? No, of course not. So I'm going to remind everybody, these epistles, the New Testament epistles, as well as the book of Revelation, is written to the first century saints and for the first century saints. It's not written to us, but it is written for our ability to glean from it, though. So it is for us, but not for us and to us. And so we got to understand it's telling us an historical account so that we can glean from it. First of all, it validates exactly that Jesus was and is and always will be exactly who he said he was and is and always will be. It also helps us understand that it is indeed the Christian age that we're in. It also helps, and what we're called to do. It also helps us understand when we start to see things happen in our land, maybe, just maybe, God's a little bit ticked and wants us to start responding a little bit better to what our leaders are doing. And maybe sometimes he's even giving us bad leaders as a sign to us. Do you know how you got that bad leader? That 30-year-old with the nice hair, the drama teacher. Do you want to know how you got that? Maybe we deserved it. I'm speaking for Canada, of course, but Maybe you should think about your country if you're from a different country. Maybe we get the leaders we deserve. All right. So how do we change that? Well, we speak the truth. We point out the extortioner, right? And we help the extortioned. That's what we do. And if there's any curriculums that go into school systems, not that I'm crazy about school systems to begin with, but certainly you don't allow inappropriate material into a grade school. That was a sign. That was a sign, I would suggest. All right, we're going to continue. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. And how I read this, guys, is that they were prepared for this, right? And I'm going to suggest to you that this has a lot to do in a physical way, because there was lots of discussions between Vespasian and Titus as to what they should do about the temple, because they discussed, should we keep that temple because it was magnificent? But they had discussions back and forth, and then they said, well, you know, we got to be done with it. And then other people said, well, if we do that, though, it's going to ruin, everybody's going to think we're very barbaric. And they were, right? But this will be really, really bad. That's right. There's lots of discussion. So they were preparing. Now, another way to look at this is the year of the Lord, right? No man knoweth the day or the hour. Well, guess what? This is the year of the Lord, and this is the month, this is the day, and this is indeed the hour. All right. And of course it says here, and the number of the army of the horsemen. So now horsemen, right? Anyways, I'll just continue. We're 200,000, and I heard the number. Now I believe this is hyperbole. All right. That he's saying this is an incalculable number. This is like way beyond my ability to calculate. So I'm going to take you to the Greek here, because I don't think that's the greatest translation. It's not horrible, but not quite as good as I think it should be. I think it's in verse 16, right? Okay, just showing you here, guys. See, it says, and the number of the military of the horses, right? And again, guys, I'm just using China as an example because I've heard people sometimes use that for that verse, and I just, well, so are they coming on horses? Or because I don't know that they have 200 million horses. Do they have 200? And that's a lot of, horse doo-doo, isn't it? Like, how are they going to, I'm not sure how they're going to do that. So, and my brother Dominic's laughing, so I must be onto something. So what I'm suggesting, well, maybe that's allegorical. It's okay. So the number's not allegorical, but the horseman is. Do you see what you're doing there? So if you're going to, right? So what I'm going to suggest, though, if we look at the Greek, it says myriads of myriads, and I heard their number. Their number is myriads of myriads. Now, you could also, by the way, look at it spiritual. Maybe this is the amount of spiritual forces behind all of this. But either way, I'm going to suggest to you that what the whole point of this hyperbole is to give the reader at that time a sense that this is going to be like, there's going to be tons of them, and you're not going to be able to withstand this. That's what the vision, I think, and the spiritual vision and the explanation here is for, to give the reader a very, very big caution. All right. We're letting you know, this isn't just going to be a little army. You ain't going to be able to take these guys. They're coming in hard, fast, and there's going to be tons of them, and you won't be able to deal with it. All right. So I think that that's what's really going on there. So I'm giving you my explanation on that. I saw the horses in the vision. And notice it's repeating, it's a vision right there, right? And them that sat on them, don't forget, there's the horses and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads, you're seeing the heads of the horses, were as the heads of lions. This isn't saying this is a weird horse. This isn't some kind of crazy apocalyptic animal that's coming out of a volcano or something of that nature. This is saying, because typically a horse is very majestic, typically very, serves us very well, pulls wagons for us, right? You can ride a horse. Horses are very majestic animals. He's saying in this case, they're going to be vicious because they're carrying the warriors in. So it's like they have like lions' heads, because these horses are coming in and they got Roman soldiers on top swinging their swords. Or if it's the zealots, then it's these zealots that have horses and they're swinging their swords, right? Whatever it is. But that's the idiom here. It's not some strange horse that, I don't know, some people decided to make in a back room somewhere. No, the idiom here is that the horse is now carrying in viciousness. And then, of course, don't forget, there's ones that are sitting on the horse, and I think that's the mouths that there's talking about here. It says, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. All right. So when I see that, I see the fire and the smoke and the brimstone coming out of the mouth, much like it says that I think it's out of Christ's mouth, you see a sword. It's not literal. The word of God is a sword, right? And it cuts to the marrow, right? That kind of thing. So fire and smoke and brimstone, I think, is some of the idiom that we might want to strongly consider. All right, so now we're going to go to the Old Testament again, because I want to take a little bit here. Maybe I can finish out reading, actually. Yeah, I'll really read this out, try to hold some of this, and then we'll go to the Old Testament, okay? And it says, and by these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. Note how it says, keeps repeating that it's coming out of their mouth. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents. Do you see that? I'm going to suggest to you that represents lying, bad influence, influencing people to do things that they shouldn't be doing, right? Or steering them in the wrong direction. Bad leaders. They're listening to these bad leaders, and now they're doing bad things, and they're going in the wrong direction. Much like, for example, Jesus said, hey, when you see the Roman armies, get out of here. And then you know what the zealots said? No, come and join us, because God's going to protect us in the temple. See, that would be, for example, a tail. That's a serpent-like tail with a sting in it, because they actually listened to that false prophet, that liar, that influencer. Okay, he's kind of persuading them to do things that they shouldn't be doing. If they had listened to Christ, they wouldn't have suffered more than likely what they suffered. All right, so you can see that the power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt. So the tails have heads. Do you see that? All right. So remember the heads and the tails. We're going to go to Isaiah 9. And it says, the people did not, by the way, this is Isaiah 9, 13 to 21. Okay. Yeah, there we go. I'm still using ESV. King James is good on this one too. All right. But since I'm kind of in ESV mode, I'm going to stick with this one for the rest of this. The people did not turn to him who struck him. I'll close that out so it doesn't distract people. The people did not turn to him who struck them. So once again, this is Isaiah saying they did not turn to the Lord who struck them. The Lord. So, in other words, your father slapped you in the butt and you're not turning to him. You're not paying attention. Nor inquire of the Lord of hosts. And remember, this is Old Testament, so this is Isaiah, the prophet of Israel, speaking to Israel. So the Lord cut off from Israel head and tail. Huh? What is he talking about? He's about to tell you. Palm branch and reed in one day. We're focusing on head and tail. The elder and honored man is the head. See that? He's telling you what the head is. That's the idiom. And the prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. See? So that's why I told you at the front end that when you see the word tail, that is an idiom for a lying prophet. That's what that is. For those who guide this people, leadership, have been leading them astray. So the leadership is the heads. Now in this context, he says, I'm going to cut off those heads. Why? Well, because they're leading people astray. And the people are listening to the leader. Much like in my country, a lot of people listen to their leaders. When their leaders were calling me non-essential, those people who claimed to love me said I was non-essential. See, they listened to the leader, and the leader led them astray by spewing out fire, smoke, and brimstone out of their mouths. And remember, think about fire, right? If the log is caught on fire, as soon as it touches another log or stick, that stick catches on fire. As soon as that stick catches on fire, touches a leaf, that leaf catches on fire. If that leaf touches a piece of paper, that paper catches on fire. And so that's why God often uses that as an idiom, that they're kindling fires with their mouths. It's because of what they're saying and how they're influencing people. And that's what's being said here. For those who guide this people have been leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are swallowed up. Therefore, the Lord does not rejoice over their young men and has no compassion on their fatherless, and their widows. For everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this, his anger has not turned away. So he hasn't turned away his anger, but his hand is still stretched out. You'll see the same thing at the back end of Book of Revelation, chapter 9. For wickedness burns like fire. See, wickedness, fire. The wickedness he's talking about doesn't necessarily have to actually be someone doing something with fire. It's any kind of wickedness. He compares it to a devouring fire. That's what he compares it to. It consumes briars and thorns. It kindles the thickets of the forest. See, it creates more fire, right? And they roll upward in a column of smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched. Now, look at what it said there. What brought in the smoke? What brought in the fire? Through the wrath of the Lord. See? So that's what you're seeing in Revelation 9, the smoke of the pit, right? And the fire and the brimstone. See? Here, it's the same kind of idiom, same kind of stuff. There's burning like fire, right? You see a column of smoke, and that's the wrath of the Lord of hosts. The land is scorched. The land is getting scorched by the wrath of God, bringing judgment. But again, he keeps saying, my anger is not turned away, but my hand is still stretched out. You can repent. You can change your mind. Stop doing what you're doing. And then it says, and the people are like fuel for the fire. No one spares another. In other words, they're basically, again, every person is almost like someone who's covered in gasoline. The fire touches them, and then they catch fire and start burning their brother and start burning their sister. And then they catch on fire, right? So, and then that's what eventually happens. Everybody's an evildoer. Everybody's a hypocrite. Everybody's just fighting for their own. And I'm going to suggest to you, you'll see a lot of that in the book of Josephus when they're talking about these things. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that because I just wanted to show you the main idiom of the smoke and the fire, right? And then that he's calling for repentance and that they don't repent, but that you're seeing the whole head and the tail is a lying prophet, and the head is the leadership that is leading those leading the people. So the leadership is lying and causing the civilians to go astray. And the tail is the lying prophets who tells them, keep listening to those guys. All right. So now I'm going to go back to the book of Josephus here real quick to show you that there's a spot here that this is another spot, I think anyways, showing you that there were several influencers there. Okay. So I already talked about how John and his contrivances and things of that nature, he was influencing them to go into war. We've talked about that, how he was puffing up people to get into this war, saying things like, oh, Rome is getting weaker and weaker. We can take them. And he was influencing these young guys, full of testosterone or whatever, and turned them into zealots. That's what he did. He spoke that. They were influenced by that. They jumped on that. And then they became those very locusts, I believe, that are in chapter 9. All right. So Egyptian false prophet is in chapter 13, guys. So I'm going to take you to chapter 13 because this is another false prophet. We already met one in one of our other sessions. This is another one. And I just want to show you that, again, Christ said there's going to be many false prophets, right? That's what he said, if I recall. And he says, don't listen to them. Don't go there, because if you listen to them, you're listening to a liar. That's what you're doing, right? So you don't want to listen to liars. That's the bottom line. They'll lead you astray. So, as we can see here, it says, but there was an Egyptian false prophet So it wasn't even a Jewish false prophet. It was an Egyptian false prophet that did the Jews more mischief than the former. For he was a cheat and pretended to be a prophet also, and got together 30,000 men. That's a lot of people that listened to this guy, that were deluded by him. See? This is a tale, folks. A serpent-like tale, a liar, a manipulator. These he led around about from the wilderness, right? From the wilderness, you're going to remember that, to the mount which was called the Mount of Olives, and was ready to break into Jerusalem by force from that place. And if he could but once conquer the Roman garrison and the people, he intended to domineer over them by the assistance of those guards of his that were to break into the city with him. But Felix prevented his attempt and met him with his Roman soldiers, while all the people assisted him in his attack upon them, insomuch that when it came to a battle, the Egyptian ran away. So this guy convinces these 30,000 people to go take this challenge on, and then when, things started looking a little rough, he takes off. He led them there, and then he takes off. Serpent-like tail. With a few others, while the greatest part of those that were with him were either destroyed or taken alive. So basically, out of the 30,000, the majority of them either died or went into prison. And some managed to have to basically be on the run forever. They had to go into their homes and hide there all the time. All right. So, and then quickly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to Matthew to unveil to you once again, what did Christ say in Matthew 24? And this is the same chapter that he said, this generation shall not pass away before all these things be fulfilled. And he just told them here. What does he say? He tells his disciples that he says, then now, if anyone tells you, look, here is the Christ, or hey, there he is, don't believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. The reason why he says, look, I told you beforehand. Who did he tell? Them. When? At that time. This is the warning he gave them. Why? Because there was going to be this Roman and Jewish war. That's why he told them that. That's why he warned them. Why would you give these warnings and it's not for them? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to warn the disciples. And if I recall correctly at the beginning of this, feel free to double check this, but I think it just says the disciples. So it's at least the 12. It's at least the 12. And he warns them. It doesn't make any sense for him to warn them if it didn't come upon them, if it wasn't going to come upon them. But we, of course, know by all the historical accounts that it did come upon them. And that's why Jesus says, I told you beforehand. That's what he says. Now, that's how we know. So, who is the Son of God? Jesus is. How do you know? Because he foretold everything. And he brought an end to the old covenant. That's a big deal. And brought in the new covenant, right? And brought in the Christian age. The Christian age. And there's many ages, I believe, in the Christian age. But we're in it. All right? And I know there's questions with that, and we can answer them. But you have to first understand that this already happened. If you keep thinking it's future, then you're going to always think that the devil's running the show. You're always going to think that. And he's not. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness. All right. Now, we just read in the book of Josephus, right? In verse 5, what did he do? He led him round about in the wilderness. I mean, it's just unbelievable. This is being written in for 69 and 70 AD, and Jesus said it in 30 AD. That's the whole point. That's why he said, I told you beforehand it's going to happen, right? He says, so if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go there. Don't go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. When did it happen? When he said it was going to happen. To who? To that generation at that time. All right. So now let's take a good look here now. I want to show you James 3. And I'm going to show you how, and again, the first line in the interpretation of the King James is not the best. This is better. I would look at it in the Greek too if you have to. But It's about taming the tongue, right? It's about taming the tongue. So it says right here in James 3, this is only a few books before the book of Revelation, and you have these amazing idioms about the tongue being like fire. And then when we get to Revelation, we don't even see any of it. Why? Because they keep telling you that the book of Revelation's for the future. You read the book of James, you see the idiom about the tongue being like fire, and you have no issue. Oh yeah, I got that figured out. You go to Revelation, all of a sudden you throw it all in the BFI bin. Why? Because they keep telling you it's future. That's why you miss it. But if you realize, no, I read the book of James, which was written somewhere around 50 to 60 AD, I get the idioms. If I carry that same thinking and those same idioms right into the book of Revelation, I'll be able to understand it as long as I look at it historically. If I keep thinking it's future, then I won't understand it. And that's where people come up with these ideas where, all of a sudden there's going to be some scorpion locust, avatar thing coming out of the ocean or something. I'm not really sure what they're going for there, but that's where you get that, right? Because they're not recognizing the apocalyptic language and the idioms that God uses for lying prophets, right? Scorpion tails like stings. Why? They sting you because they lead you astray and you end up going off the cliff because you start listening to, and I witnessed that in my own country. I watched people listen to a leader who was breathing out smoke and fire and they went right with it. They got kindled right along with them. I mean, a nurse not understanding informed consent. Are you serious? I have to explain that to you. You actually fell for that? You really believe that you listen to that guy saying informed consent? That's the center pin of medical practice. You inform me, and then I either consent or do not consent to that medication. Period. That's historical. That's God's laws for sure, and it's definitely man's laws. We have case precedents all day long. And all of a sudden, I saw doctors and nurses take those laws and throw them in the garbage because of one leader who lied to them. That's what's going on back here. And by the way, it repeats. Yes, it's not as bad as this, but we're supposed to make sure. That's what the Christians are supposed to do. We're supposed to note it when there's a leader that's going nuts. We're supposed to note it and see it when they're being lied to by people. We're supposed to note it and say it and speak against it and tell everybody. That's what we're supposed to do. We're peacefully, of course, but firmly, because God's with us. He's not with the lies. So I'm going to suggest to you, if we understood that, we'd be a lot more active, and we would have been a lot more active, and we wouldn't have let all the nonsense that's been happening for, as far as I'm concerned, for decades, happen. And it started, by the way, a little note. 1985, when they got rid of the Lord's Day Act, when a lot of you, if you're anywhere around 40 or 50 years old or older, you'll remember we had every Sunday off. That was a good thing to have. It's good for a society to have a day off where everybody gets that day off. And that was under the Lord's Day Act. That was a law in Canada, and they ousted it. And I think that created a lot of damage to a lot of families. That was just the beginning. By taking a concept or a principle of God, right? It doesn't matter what day it is. Okay, we're under the new covenant, we're under grace, but it does matter still to have, it's just proven, it's historical, it's precedence. We already know this, but we always have to relearn it because someone shows up and says, why are you telling me when to shut my business and stuff? Look, it's for the betterment of society. So you can make your living 6 days a week, and now in order to get Sunday off, now what do you got to do? You got to get a government job. That's crazy. See, we went backwards on that one. See, churches didn't say anything to that. All right. But again, I'm speaking for my country. If you're from a different country, well, maybe you should take a look and say, hey, where did my country go wrong? And start saying, maybe we need to start putting those Christian principles back into our legal systems. Maybe, and they're already there more than likely. You just got to put that at the forefront. Don't let the liars trick you. All right. So let's look at James 3 here, what he says about the tongue. And in the context, by the way, it's this. Look, it says, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways. Okay, that's why I like this a little bit better. The word is stumble in the Greek. It's not offend, because you can offend somebody by saying she or dear today. So that doesn't work. But he says, for we all stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, see, stumble in what he says. In other words, this doesn't mean you don't say things. No, no, no. You make sure you do say things. You just don't say them incorrectly. Don't stumble in what you say. You see evil, you call that out, right? If you don't call it out, well, then I'm going to suggest to you you're stumbling by not calling it out, right? But if you see goodness, then you should compliment or encourage that goodness, right? All right, so he says, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. See, speaking bridles your entire person, according to James. If we put bits into the mouths of horses, see how the mouths, horses, so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder. What he's saying is, here's this huge ship, and it's just a little part, just a little rudder that guides the whole thing, right? And he compares this to the tongue and what we say. Wherever the will of the pilot directs, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. That's what's going on. If you read through the book of Josephus, if we still have time, I may take you to one other spot, but I think I've already touched them, where they are influencing through their speech, just like that false prophet. 30,000 people, and most of them got led to captivity or death because of one man shooting off his mouth and being a false prophet and a liar, right? That's very damaging. And then it continues. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. He's actually calling the tongue a small fire, and it lights up forests. That's the idiom here. This is in the New Testament. Like I said, just a few books before the book of Revelation. And the tongue is a fire. Literally a fire, a world of unrighteousness, your tongue. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life. That's just out of your mouth. That's just your tongue, the stuff that you say. False accusations, folks, lies, right? I've never been called non-essential until 3 years ago. That's damaging. That hurts people when you say things like that. It's clearly discrimination. I was never accused of not caring about somebody until I said, "Oh yeah, I'd like to go in and see. I'd like to go see my dad here." "Oh no. If you care about him, you won't go see him." What? That's the opposite of the truth. And that's what happens when people allow fear. Yeah, fear casts out perfect love, doesn't it? So the tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life. And I'm going to suggest to you again, mouths, talking, lies, right? And encouraging people, calling people deplorable and things of this nature, and you're the leadership, and then the civilians or, civil servants are participating in that nonsense, right? It sets on fire the entire course of life. This all started by talking. It was all out of the mouths, right? The Faucis and the Tams, right? Blah, blah, blah. There you go. And set on fire by hell. And by the way, he's basically saying that your tongue is on fire and it's lit up. That's actually Gehenna. That's the lake of fire. That's not the grave. It's like the lake of fire is lighting your tongue on fire. That's what he's saying. See the fire and, the lake of fire coming out of your face. That's what he's saying. It's not as simple as just, be nice when you talk. No. I don't have to be nice. I have to be honest. See, I have to be truthful. I have to speak against tyranny. I have to help those who are oppressed. I have to tell the oppressor to stop, particularly if I'm in position to do it. Maybe an elderly widow can't do it, but maybe I can. And that church is supposed to do that. Could you imagine if in 2015, Miss Kathleen Wynne, when she brought that little filthy curriculum into the school systems, if every single church in the country of Canada that claims to be Christian, if every pulpit said, we're taking out our children right now, do you think that that curriculum would have lasted more than a week? Because I'm going to suggest that it wouldn't have. But because the pulpits didn't say that, and because everyone continued to go along to get along, now you have it. Now all of a sudden, you've got, those men that have hair like women doing little library shows for the children. You see what happens when you don't speak against evil, when you don't speak against, when you don't react to something as a church? If everybody who claims to be a Christian in Canada would have pulled their children out or their grandchildren out, I'll tell you right now, that curriculum wouldn't be there right now. But we didn't respond to the slap. We didn't respond. So, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Now, if I were to take you to Revelation 8 and Wormwood, remember when we talked about this, I'm just going to kind of remind you a little bit of this. It talks about the wormwood coming into the water, right? And we read that scripture that said the waters are the peoples and the multitudes and the tongues and the nations, right? So if you keep that poisonous wormwood into the picture, right, and that the waters are people, right, the third part of waters became poisonous just like the poison that came in, and they were, right, and many people died of the peoples, nations, multitudes, and tongues because of their poisonous venom, which was also going to be centered around lies. When you lie to people, then they move. And when they accept those lies, when they take in those lies, when they drink that poison, when they actually catch on fire themselves, then they start abusing people according to the instruction of the leader. And that's the picture there, all right, that we're seeing. Those are the idioms. All right, those are the idioms that you're seeing, I think. So let me take you to the back end of Revelation here, and then I will probably try to. No, I think we've covered enough of Josephus as well. I think I'm pretty comfortable there. I'm thinking. So he continues here, and he says, so just as a reminder, right? So the fire, the smoke, the brimstone, right, and it issued out of their mouths. Right? So now you're kind of catching what James said, right? Also what Isaiah said about the heads and the tails and what they represent. They represent scorning, horribly, basically antichrist type of leaders, right? Not paying attention to the laws of God, for example, or nor the true good laws of men that abide in laws of God, right? They're listening to those leaderships. Now you got some false prophets and liars, etc., etc. All right. So that's the picture here. That's the idiom. That's the flavor. And when you read the book of Josephus and Tacitus, that's what you're reading. That's what you're seeing. And this is apocalyptic, idiomatic language to give you the picture. Remember, it's the first century saints. They would have understood this language. They would have understood what this meant. And they would have seen this and they would have known and understood that things are going to get bad. They would have understood that. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues. Now we're going to stop on the word plague for real because of the bubonic plague. All right. I just want you to understand that that is not a flu. Plagues, all right? I think it's this one right here, right? Yes, from these. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. It basically means wound, stripe, or affliction, okay? That's what it means. A blow, a stripe, a wound, an affliction, all right? Wounds, blows, that's what they are, okay? So I just wanted to make sure you understood that as we move forward because of the whole bubonic plague thing. Sometimes people think it's some kind of flu. No, they weren't killed by these wounds, these hits, these strikes, right? These afflictions. Yet they repented not of the works of their hands. And this is exactly, yet they will not return to me, saith the Lord. I'm smiting them, yet they will not return to me, saith the Lord. See, it's the same thing here. And at the tail end, you're going to get a little flavor of how these guys, how the nation of Israel, old covenant Israel, was behaving, which is evident by the crucifixion of Christ and evident in the epistles of Paul. That this is how they were operating. Says they were not. So it says, the rest of the men, which were not killed by these wounds, afflictions, plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship what? Devils. So what were they doing? Worshiping devils. And that they should not worship idols of gold and silver and brass and stone of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Were they doing that? Yes. That's why he's saying they wouldn't repent. They'd keep doing it. Neither repented of their what? Murders. They wouldn't stop doing it. They kept doing it. Nor of their sorceries. All right. Yes, this can be whatever potions. I don't care what you want to think this is. It doesn't matter. It is definitely the word pharmakeia. I understand that people know this now, which is great. So I will just show that to you, that sorcery. Yes. So where we get the word pharmacy appears to come from this word. So I'll just show it to you real quick because I don't want to go by it. I think this is the one right here. They're sorceries. As you can see, pharmakeia. All right. So the use of medicine, drugs, or spells, magic, sorcery, enchantment. All right. So that's the deal there. Why do you think informed consent is so important? I should not have to tell anyone who has even half a brain cell in our medical practices that informed consent is the root of their career. How dare you call yourself a hero when you couldn't even get informed consent? And a little side note, heroes don't usually call themselves heroes. Other people do it. So when you're calling yourself a hero by putting a sign on your lawn, I don't mind telling you, that don't seem like a hero to me. And over here it says, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. So, in sorcery is magic, lying, of course, would be included that. So what do you have? You have lying, murderous thieves that fornicate and worship devils. You think it was judgment time? I'm thinking it was judgment time. And this is the response to those imprecatory prayers. And I'm going to show you a quick verse in Psalm 34. Affliction will slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. And that's the response to the imprecatory prayer. That's Psalm 34:21. And so God uses affliction to bring down the wicked, because there's a point where when they don't want to, if they don't want to repent of their deeds, if they don't repent, then that's indeed what ends up happening. So of course, that is something that I wanted to show you the consistency from the Old Testament right into the New Testament, right into the book of Revelation. All right, so I'm thinking that I've covered everything here. I might take you, though, to Josephus, book 5, just to show you a little bit of information. And I think, sorry guys, I must have picked the one that goes the farthest way down. So we'll try to get up there as fast as we can. Book 5, I think that's what we want. All right, I'm going to take you to chapter 10. And in chapter 10, verse 5, I think that there's something, chapter 10, that's what we're going for here. Sorry, guys. Be patient with me. Thank you. All right, we're almost there. All right, verse 5. Here we go. And I just want to again kind of bring home that even Josephus speaks to the barbarity of that generation. And Jesus so often, go through the Gospels, he would say, this is an evil generation. This is an adulterous, evil generation. Okay? And I want to remind you too what he says about how bad of a time, but that it would be the worst time. And I want you to see what Josephus says, and then I'm going to take you to Matthew 24. So, Book of Josephus, Book 5, chapter 10, verse 5. It is therefore impossible to go distinctly over every instance of these men's iniquity. He's basically saying, I can't tell you everything, all the bad stuff that these guys did and are doing. I shall therefore speak my mind here at once briefly, that neither did any other city ever suffer such miseries, nor did any age ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this was from the beginning of the world. Now, this is a Jewish man that has access to the Old Testament, clearly. And he just said that the generation that he was witnessing, that generation, was more fruitful in wickedness than this was from the beginning of the world. More wicked than anything that he had ever imagined. That's what he's saying here. And that's exactly what Jesus said. Finally, they brought the Hebrew nation into contempt. So because the Jewish folks, Old Covenant Israel, was in high status. And this took all of that away. All right, but I want to show you now Matthew 24. And this should bring you peace to know. Do me a favor, Brother Dom. We're just going to just erase 23 and 26 there. Just give me the whole Matthew 24. Sorry, I was talking on that. Thanks, brother. All right. And again, I'm still in ESV this time, guys. I understand that, but you'll know it in the Old King James. And notice it says signs of the end of the age, right? End of the age, not the end of the entire world, end of the age. All right. So we're going to continue. Sorry about that. And he talks about, yes. All right. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay, here it is. It says, he says to them, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. All right? Which again, guys, very, very much brings it right down to the first century Old Covenant Israel. This Matthew 24, he's telling them, pray that your flight, when you guys have to take off, isn't in the winter or on your Sabbath. Why? Because on the Sabbath, right, there was limitations. They weren't supposed to work and things like that, et cetera, right? So he says, pray that it won't be on Sabbath. Would that matter to me and you today? No. But talking to them at that time as Old Covenant Israel, when they had a law and the prophet and the law of Moses, their Sabbath was, right, what it was. It was on the seventh day of the week. Right. And I always say seventh day of the week because there was no Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday back then. It was on the seventh day. Right. The seventh day. Do you know what the seventh day is? No, you don't. You don't know what the seventh day is anymore. Why? Because we're under the new covenant. We're under grace. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now. That's exactly what Josephus says in 70 AD. No, but here's the beautiful piece for me and you. For me and you. Anybody listening to this? And never will be. And never will be another time like that time. Praise God. Hallelujah. That's what we should be saying. So, and you know what else that should do? It should get us to be of good courage, not fear, and it should move us to indeed Preach the gospel. But part of preaching the gospel is doing what he's asked us to do. Shine the light. Expose the evil. Speak against it with your words. How do you get rid of lies? By speaking the truth against those lies. And it should move us to be able to do that confidently, rather than them always telling you that you're going to go through that, right? So we are blessed to have this beautiful book of Revelation that gives us the historical account that finally brought the old covenant to an end, which ushered in the new covenant under Christ, so we can know that it already happened. We know that Jesus already took care of it. He's our mediator. He's our high priest, seated already at the right hand of the Father, right? We have resurrection hope in Christ who reconciles us to the Father, and through his Spirit, we can have the courage to do the good works, eschew the evil, and of course, be here and willing to stand in the gap and call out the leaders when they do something wrong. We speak to them the truth, right? And of course, we try our best through those truths to also speak to the civilians, everyone, and civil servants too, and let them know. Let them know that they're here to serve us, indeed, but ultimately that God is indeed watching, and we should indeed abide in the laws of God. All right? So hopefully that encourages you to think about all of that. Think about your country. Think about the things that God might want you to do as well. And take great comfort, everyone. Take great comfort in knowing that Christ is there and mediating for you right now. Thank you so much for listening, all of you. And I look forward to next week when we cover Revelation chapter 10. And in the meantime, grace and peace.
'Cause I'm gonna follow you. I'm gonna follow you and follow you home.
In the mighty name of Yeshua Jesus, the Messiah. Amen.